Hello, everybody. We have Not Your Gas, Not Your Power with Mr. Kohn. Jonathan Kohn is a Venezuelan-born energy professional with experience in land and BIS management for the oil and gas industry. Prior to founding BitPetro, Jonathan served as VP for Balanced Energy LLC, where he was responsible for the deployment and capitalization of over 70 drilling projects in Texas. BitPetro was founded in 2014. It focuses on the use of data science to provide land acquisition and research services focused on the intersection of Bitcoin and the energy industry. Mr. Kohn also runs Crypto Concierge, a Bitcoin humanitarian project on the Colombia-Venezuela border in the city of Cucuta. Welcome, Mr. Kohn.
Thanks, man. Can you guys hear me? All right, great. Well, welcome. My name, again, is Jonathan Kohn. I am the founder of BitPetro, and in 1999, I started in oil and gas and learned a lot about land and titles, and so I hope to give you guys a little introduction into that. Oh, you know what? You know what I'm going to need? That. So, a little bit about oil and gas is, at least my involvement in oil and gas. I started in 99. In 2015, I shifted into midstream. Midstream is pipelines, so upstream is production. And then in 2013, I ran into Bitcoin. I started mining with a small group. We eventually turned our initial profits in the mine into working interest through my oil company. So what we did is we sold working interest in a 4-well package, and that basically was, I believe, the first oil and gas Bitcoin transaction. That brought on the idea that we could do this again and we could do it for the general market and we could create a marketplace for minerals and working interest that could be accessed globally. So in 2014, we went to the Texas Bitcoin conference and we went to NAPE. At NAPE, we debuted, got a lot of attention. It was very exciting. And then the regulators came and said, there is no way that you are going to divorce the dollar from the petro. You're not going to turn on your lights. You're not going to do what you're saying you're going to do. And so we pivoted. We had to go back to just doing what we were doing in the oil and gas world, and that's just general land work. And that translates, in my world at least, to maps. So that map you see right there is an example of the work that we do. The blue gradient is the day-ahead pricing for ERCOT. The polygons that you see that are hollow, those are tight shale formations, and as well as other formations. But those are generally the plays in Texas. And then the polygons that are filled with colors, that's the wind regions in Texas. All the other little symbols that you see there, those are all power plants. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the data, I'm abstracting it away into heat maps. And so I can look at what you as a miner want to do, and I can say, let's make this a heat map. And then let's add another heat map on top of it, and another heat map on top of it. And so when you're trying to look for a location, all we have to do is look for the hottest area. And that's it. We start focusing on those areas, and we begin to get you tied up with the property. So a little bit about the drilling process, right? Like, how does this all happen? It happens because you initially go out, and a geologist determines there's a region of interest. Let's go drill that. At that point, they call me. I'm the landman. I have to go do the research and figure out who owns this land. And by ownership, I mean the mineral rights. There is some surface that can be tied with that, but for the most part, it's minerals. And you are leasing the mineral rights in order to be able to have access to develop those minerals. When the leasing phase is complete, you enter into the drilling phase. The drilling phase, in the business, we like to call it, first you permit, then you turn right. Turn right is when you're basically turning and going down. You reach total depth. At that point, you pull out your bit and you put down pipe, and that pipe is set with concrete. This is a point of the well where you need completion. Most of you have probably heard of fracking. That is one of the ways that we can complete a well, but there are certainly others. At the point the well is completed, you have the initial production phase, and then we move on into marketing and sales. And so at that point, that's really your sales and distribution channel. This portion of the project is now operating, right? This is where you guys are going to go to the operators, and you're going to try to negotiate to acquire natural gas. You're going to try to negotiate to have access to the land. And so there's a lot about surface rights, mineral rights, and in general oil and gas rights that are created that you need to understand before you start making these deals. Because at the end of the day, if you do not have title in some way, shape, or form, you do not own that asset. So property ownership can be broken down generally by deeds, right? Like everybody understands here that property ownership is done through deeds. What they most of the time miss is that deeds don't equal title. Deeds are simply the evidence of title. Title is the chain of conveyances. So similar to Bitcoin, you have a chain of UTXO, you spend the Bitcoin, and now you have your transaction ID. So those concepts exist in land acquisitions, but there's also another level to this. There's what's called the bundle of rights. And the bundle of rights in property is control, possession, exclusion, enjoyment, and disposition. Those same rights actually get distilled down into oil and gas, and you, from those original rights, create surface, mineral, and royalty rights. What does that mean? That means that when I take a lease, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that that person owns that real estate by doing the research at the courthouse, pulling the documents from patent, so from when Texas started all the way to today. And we've got to check all of that and get through that whole process. That contract gives the oil and gas company the right to go in, produce. The oil and gas company will then subdivide out those rights into other portions of contracts that they're basically trying to get services for. Those would be farm-out agreements. So in the example of me, I go out, I lease a property, but I'm not an operator, right? Like I don't have a rig. I can contract that rig and I can trade a portion of my royalties for basically the services. An offtake agreement, which will be the last one we talk about, is more just a contract between you, the buyer, right, and me, the seller, and we agree on a price, and we agree on an amount, and a delivery date. So those are the basic concepts that we're going to try and cover today. So fee simple estate is a thing that happens in the United States and very few other countries in the world. Fee simple means simply that you can control all the rights in your property, from the surface to the bottom of the earth, and from the surface to the end of the atmosphere. These rights then can be sold, gifted, they can be limited, they can be done in whole or in part. I can give my daughter and my son 50% of my estate. So you start to see how you really have to go through the whole title research process to be able to determine the property ownership. Now, what's really interesting about property ownership is that it relates directly to Bitcoin, in that Bitcoin might be the first idealized form of property ownership. You see, in land, you still have the state has rights against your property. They can seize your property if you don't pay your taxes. There's a lot of different things that they can limit your ability to do things on your property, or they can straight take it away. Bitcoin's different. No one can take your Bitcoin away from you. As long as you are not going to give somebody the private keys, that's it. So it is an idealized form of ownership, but it is not fee simple. There are other types of estates that you can have. You can have a life estate, you can have rental agreements, and you can have other types of leases, but that pretty much covers all the property ownership and what we deal with in that world. Now, mineral rights. Mineral rights are similar to property rights, but they now deal with the lease. This is when we are already talking about what are the rights for me as an oil and gas company to reasonably access the surface and basically to come in and develop operations, and now I have to pay you, so I have to give you an initial rental to go in and basically have the lease, so I paid for the lease. There's a bonus consideration, which is basically an additional incentive for you to sign the lease with me. And there are delayed rentals. In the case that I drill the well, I cannot complete the well because I don't have a pipeline to send my product down the line, I might pay delayed rentals. So those can be shut-in payments in the case that the well was producing and stopped. But there are clauses in the lease that basically control all of this. Finally, you have the right to receive a portion of the profits. And this is known as royalties. And this is one of the ways that you can also access natural gas to hedge your electric costs rising, because natural gas is a portion of the electric cost, right? Like when wind doesn't blow, sun doesn't shine, we have to create that power from somewhere. One of the most reliable and cleanest ways to do it is natural gas. And so because of that, you're going to basically be dealing with mineral rights either at the wellhead from the perspective of owning the minerals and hedging out your price goes up with natural gas and oil. You've traded your Bitcoins over for some amount of royalties. You can affect the same thing as far as like buying natural gas because you want to control your electric rate. A little bit more about the lease and the surface. It's really kind of a weird thing that you would think that surface rights go with the surface owner, but they really don't. They're mostly controlled by the mineral owner. So the mineral owner has the ability to limit the surface operations. They can simply say, I don't want you to have a well on my property. You can go next door and you can tap my minerals, but I don't want the well on my property. Surface damage causes, again, this is weird. This is somebody destroys the land by putting in a big pit like that. That's a mud pit. That's where all the mud from the drilling goes into. That is damage to the land if that's a farm. That damage is a consideration that's paid as part of the contract. And typically what you see is that the mineral owner, and most of the time, is negotiating for the landowner, the surface owner. Everybody's trying to get along, but really it falls on the mineral owner to negotiate for those rights. There's location approval, land reclamation. You must put it back the way you found it. Water clauses. Water clauses are interesting because water rights are very similar to mineral rights. They can be separated from the property as well. So water rights, timber rights, and oil and gas rights are part of that bundle of sticks that we basically call the fee simple estate. Let's see. And now we get to the fun part. This is working interest and royalty interest. This is where you get paid. Actually, the thing that you see in the background there, that's a paycheck. That's how your paychecks come from the oil company. It basically gives you your monthly costs, your revenues. It breaks everything down, and at the bottom of that is a little check attached. And if you are paying costs of drilling, which means you're a working interest owner, you have those itemized costs as well. If you're not paying costs, you still see those costs, but they won't affect you. You'll just get a straight check that is a percentage of the production. Because it's only a percentage of the production, a working interest, a royalty is not considered a real property interest, while a working interest is. Working interest represents not only the right to access the property, it also represents the burden of the cost of operations. So royalty plus working interest will net out to be the total of the revenues from the well, right? So, farm-out agreement. A farm-out agreement is, like I said before, I own the property because I lease the property. I am now the farmer. I need people to come in and do the work for me. What I will do is I will find a contractor, and that contractor will say, okay, I'll do the work. Maybe I'll charge you a little bit, but maybe we do a better deal and I charge you less because I'm going to earn an overriding royalty interest. An overriding royalty interest is similar to the royalty that the landowner gets in that there is no cost. Basically, that's above all the costs. So if I go out and I buy a lease and I flip it to an oil company, but I keep an override, I don't have to pay any of the costs for that well. I still get my checks. Everything is good. At some point, the oil and gas company might even tell me, hey, John, would you like to trade your overriding royalty interest? And at that point, it becomes a convertible override, and trade it for more money later. Now, that more money later is going to cost me because now I have to incur the costs like every other working interest owner in the well. Typically, this happens after payout. So a well goes in, everybody gets their initial investment back. At that point, I have the option, if it's in the clause of the contracts, to take an override and convert it over to working interest. If you guys are going to be dealing in this world as far as like trying to buy oil and gas, particularly oil and gas at the lease, you are going to have to do this process because you don't want to do operations on your own. Operations are hard. okay? Oil field equipment breaks, things happen. Oil wells can and often do stop producing. You have to go in and treat the well, you have to change pumps, you have to do a lot of stuff. So if this is not your area of expertise, find somebody to work with. Cut a deal. It's really worthwhile. Finally, you have the offtake agreement. And this is probably the most common agreement that you as a miner will come into contact with outside of the deed that you're purchasing the land with. Offtake agreements are pretty simple. It allows you, the operator, right, the mining operator, to say, hey, I want to cap the amount of money that I'm going to be spending on energy. I'm going to do that by buying gas and producing Bitcoin, right? I want to make sure that that gas is going to get to me, and I'm going to contract for it in a way that everybody's clear on what's going to be expected. You, the operator of the well, know that you're going to make X amount of money for X amount of barrels or MCF of gas that you're going to give me, the buyer. You guys have to remember, a lot of this stuff happened, or these contracts were established for oil and gas to do business with oil and gas. We're going to have to basically make a square peg, fit a square peg into a round hole. And that's not that hard. You can simply do this by structuring the agreement to where everybody's clear on what's happening, and you are very, very clear on what you are allowed to do on the property and what you are not. We are hearing examples of people going and buying gas. The miners go set up their equipment, they show up and they start doing stuff that upsets the landowner. In many cases, the landowner sometimes owns the surface. So he's the mineral owner and the surface owner. And if you make that guy angry, he's going to get on the oil company, and the oil company is going to kick you out. And they can call a force majeure clause and say, this guy's impeding operations, out of my property right now. And that's it. They shut off the gas, kick him off, that's it. So be very wary of that. Also be very wary that oil and gas operators are businessmen. They're shrewd. They want to make money. You want gas at the lowest possible cost. They want that gas at the highest possible cost. So what they're going to start doing is they're going to start going to the closest reference market, Henry Hub, Waha, and they're going to go to those prices, and they're going to say to you, hey, we're going to go off of this base rate, and maybe there's a deduction, and maybe there isn't. But I want that rate because my neighbor is getting that rate, so why shouldn't I get this rate, right? Think about those things. These are the more stranded the asset, probably the less likely that they're going to ask you for a reference market, but it still could happen. So now let's get into how Bitcoin mining will intersect with the different portions of oil and gas. So the E&P sector of oil and gas is known as upstream. E&P is exploration and production. And it focuses on drilling activities, it focuses on exploration, recovering the crude and natural gas. And at the end of the day, the miners, what they're going to be doing here is they're either going to be going and saying, hey, I want your flare gas, because that's the popular thing. But they could also be going to the operator and saying, listen, we know that there's a well here that's making natural gas, but that natural gas is not allowing you to make the most amount of money out of your oil. Somehow it's impeding that. Either there's too much gas and you don't have a pipeline, or you can't control those pressures. There's a lot of different ways that gas can affect the production of oil. And at the end of the day, 80% of the revenue of an oil company comes from liquids. So for them, the gas is a nuisance. It's not necessarily the thing they're going after. In some gas plays, it is. But typically, those gas plays have a lot of liquids. And what they're doing is they're spending tons and tons of money on CapEx to take those liquids, take them out of the gas, sell the gas and sell the liquids. Because again, the liquids is the part where they're making their big bucks. So what does mining allow for an upstream company? It allows them to get access to sites where exploration is not possible because there's no market, because there's no way to get that gas out. But if all of a sudden you have a location that either had, let's say, for example, shale. There's a lot of shale that got developed, and the liquid portion of the shale was the first thing that got developed. They did hit some gas, But as soon as they found the oil window, they moved right to it. So all of the gathering systems, all of the things that are bringing in that natural gas, that oil, all of that got done basically for the liquids. All the gas, that's all still there. And it could be tapped. And not only could it be tapped, that gas is probably the ideal gas for Bitcoin mining because it's dry. The second that you have liquids in the gas, you have to derate, you have to control, because if not, you get engine knocks, your engine basically falls apart. So think about that. Think about the fact that stranded gas is profitable, but it's not just flare, right? This is something where we might see South Texas pop up as a new hub, especially with the Eagleford. The Eagleford is a massive formation. It runs pretty much parallel to the coast of Texas. And there is, in areas of the Eagleford, there's trillions of cubic feet of gas. I don't hear any Bitcoiners talking about developing those natural gas assets, not just to mine, but to develop them and then turn around and wait for the natural gas asset to appreciate. And now you've got a hedge. Now you've got a three-way arbitrage you can play. You can produce energy, you can sell gas, you can mine Bitcoin. If you are a large publicly traded company that's doing mining, you're probably going to end up here. This is going to be one of the ways, one of the levers that you will have in order to be able to control your price of the electron, but you're doing it at the molecule at this stage. Bitcoin mining and midstream. So midstream is known as the gathering portion of oil and gas, right? It's the pipelines, it's compressors, it's treatment stations, and all the activities related to transporting the natural gas asset and the oil. What does Bitcoin mining allow midstream to do? It's not that a Bitcoin mine is going to help midstream directly. It's more of an indirect benefit. These facilities oftentimes are at the end of the electric grid. What does that mean? If the substation here, they might be a mile, 2, 3 miles away from that substation. So they're basically getting really bad power. They can come in and install generators on site. Remember, they are the gas source. They can put that generation in and de-risk it by pairing it with a mining facility. Now, what they're doing is they're installing resilience into this facility. They're creating a method for power generation that's subsidized by the Bitcoin mining, and that power generation in and of itself is reducing the risk of that facility. Every single time that facility goes down, they're losing money. So having power generation on site is very important for these players. So we've talked about the contracts, we've talked about the concepts of ownership. Let's talk a little bit about what the rainbow of possibilities is for you buying the asset, the natural gas. And let's talk a little bit about not only how you can do it, but what are the specific benefits and pitfalls of those. So number one, you can buy the lease. You can go out and say, I have a geologist friend over here. He's telling me there's gas over there. Let's go buy that lease. Now, like we were talking about, we're going to do a farm-out agreement. We're going to find farmees to do the work. When those farmees come in and help me get the well up and going, now I've got producing assets. It's very complex. It's very risky, but I'm going to get the absolute most benefit out of this deal because I'm controlling, right, the interest. So every bit of gas is mine. If I'm generating electricity from that gas, I'm paying myself. This is the best way to control electric costs, not for right now, but definitely for 5, 10 years down the road. It's really going to be the only way to do it unless oil and gas completely craters, and we're just not seeing that. Natural gas production is going down because ESG is driving down investment in these projects, and we're just not having enough of them. Let's see. Direct purchase from upstream operators. That would be where instead of you going and getting the lease, you find somebody that already has the lease, is already producing, and you say, hey, I want to work out a deal. I want to buy a certain amount of your gas, and you're probably going to have to do this early in the life of the well because when that upstream company is tied to a midstream company, typically they've committed 100% of their production to that company. It's not very common that you're going to have, oh yeah, leave 10% there for me. So get in early if you're going to do this step. It can be very creative. It's very flexible. This is where you have the oil company coming to you, the miner, if they have no way to get the gas down the line. But this can also be the place where you, as a miner, can decide to, I guess, explore a little bit what the market can give you, and specifically geographically, you will need to be very aware that that upstream sector, the gas in upstream, right? It's going to vary. Every location is different. So you might have sour gas over here, you might have dry gas over here, you might have liquids in another part of Texas. You're going to have to deal with all those things at the upstream level. At the midstream level, you're going to get perfect gas. This is the gas that's already done. All the liquids have been knocked out. It's been treated. It's what's going to your house. You are going to pay more. So it's not as flexible of a deal, but it's certainly attractive because you have the amount of gas that you're going to get from there, and the continuous nature of that stream is not going to be matched by what upstream can do. It just can't. So in the future, I kind of see this being the most likely portion of oil and gas to integrate mining, because they're not going to want people at their facilities. These facilities cost a lot of money, and at the end of the day, it's risky. This is, there are noxious fumes in there. There's regulatory requirements as to just being on the property. So a midstream company, somebody like an EnLink, is most likely going to experiment. They're going to be the last to adopt, but they might start experimenting. Finally, there's, like I said, the one with the least risk, which is basically hedging your electric costs by owning oil and gas natural assets. What you're going to be doing there is basically buying royalties, buying mineral estates. You're then just getting the revenue checks like we talked about from the well, and that's offsetting your increasing cost in electricity. So our thesis is that Bitcoin mining will eventually unlock a lot of the exploration that's been impeded by basically the market not having a demand for this natural gas. That natural gas is going to find a home in Bitcoin miners. That Bitcoin miner is going to need power generation to convert the power, but then that power generation can stay there. If the Bitcoin mine is no longer an attractive investment, the power generation certainly will be, because guess what? At least in Texas, we're growing really fast, and the demand for power is huge. On the other side of this, I think that we're going to see the larger corporate miners, they're going to begin to address the rising cost of electricity by going out and purchasing the electron at the molecule. They need to do that because it's the only way that 10 years down the line, if you have a gas stream that can produce, let's call it 10 or 50 megawatts, and it can do that for 10 years, that's the only way that you know the price of electricity is not going to go up. You are going to basically have your cost of generation, and you are going to have some amount of variable cost. You're probably not going to be able to get to 100% control of the working interest and the royalties in the well, so you're not going to have 100% of the revenue, but you could certainly get to 80, 90, maybe even 95% of the natural gas in the well you could own. And if you're doing that, you are definitely controlling your cost for electricity. So I got about a minute left. Open it up to questions. You guys can find us on bitpetro.app. You can scan the QR code. There's our phone. We do competitive land acquisitions for miners, for oil and gas companies, and for renewable energy companies. You come to us, and we basically find at least 5 sites that will work with you, and then we're going to go attack them until we get them, or we move on to the next one, and we get that one. That's the service. Any questions? Oh, do we have a mic?
We're just getting out.
Okay, go ahead. Sure. So the question was, do I see offshore projects that, for example, Pemex has an offshore project that might not be profitable to bring it to fruition, or other scales, and would Bitcoin miners be able to basically fix that by coming in, putting power generation on the spot, and being that stopgap economically for them? I think so, onshore more than offshore. I think onshore you're going to have a lot more economies of scale, definitely. It's very difficult to do an offshore project. The sea likes to eat everything. So that's going to be really difficult to overcome. However, if it's a dry gas field and the well's already there, if we're talking about an existing well that's been drilled out and they're just getting dry gas and there's no more volatile organic compounds or anything like that. Sorry, volatile organic compounds. There's no more of the higher chain petrochemicals there. Yeah, you can totally take that dry gas and probably install generation on the offshore facility directly and probably use the water to cool. But again, you're dealing with the ocean. This is going to be a huge project, very costly. And for the same amount of money, you'll be able to do it onshore, and you'll be able to have teams that are going to be able to work on the miners onshore. So yes, from the perspective of if there's a large natural gas asset that is already there and it doesn't have the pipelines to it, or maybe they drilled a well and it had too much nitrogen in it or something, and the market wouldn't want to take it. Bitcoin miners will take those opportunities. They will run with them. They will make money. Yes, sir.
How picky should you be with the gas that you find? It's got really high sulfur content or CO2. Should you just move on and find cleaner gas, or should you really double down and try and work a deal to get the price lower and then deal with all the complexity?
It totally depends on that specific well and that specific source. If you have sulfur, if you have H2S, probably stay away from it. I mean, sour gas is very difficult to deal with, and you better have a lot of operational expertise to do that. Yeah, does that answer your question? Everywhere's a little different.
What would be the price for electricity? The price range for the electricity for mainstream Bitcoin mining of gas?
It's all dependent on the fuel, right? So if your natural gas cost is $1 an MCF, you're going to have cheaper electricity. So you have the components are your generator, your fuel source, and then really the operations of that generator, right? You still have to have a person there. They're going to have to be mixing, or changing the fuel mix, fixing components, repairing stuff. These are machines. So at the end of the day, all of that falls into, I don't know if that answered your question, but at the end of the day, it varies on fuel. You can expect that, let's say you have $3, $4 gas, it'll be roughly like $5, maybe $6, sorry, $50 to $60 a megawatt, yeah.
Is it genset included for reasonable price?
That's thinking about the whole package, the fuel, the generator, and the OpEx. Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, we're going to wrap this one up.
Guys, thank you so much for coming. Again, my name is Jonathan Kohn. My company name is BitPetro. We're here to help you find land and power. We work with an energy broker so we can facilitate power purchase and energy supply agreements. And if you have any questions, find me. Be happy to meet you. Thanks again.